Hi and welcome to the Boundaries module. I am Annie Del Busto Cohen. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Leadership Development Designer in the Wordle Center for Leadership. And my fabulous co-facilitator is going to introduce herself.
Good morning, afternoon, night, wherever you are. My name is Dana Olivo. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Assistant Director for Residential Education in the Department of Residence Life.
So what's going to happen in this module is it's really more informal, and Dana and I are just going to have a conversation about some prompts around boundaries, and we hope that this conversation will serve as some food for thought when you're thinking about what boundaries you establish as a student leader, why might you be hesitant to do that, how you can assert them, some stuff that we've learned, some just tips and things. So we hope you enjoy, and if you have questions, you're welcome to reach out to either of us so that we can follow up with you after. So we're just gonna jump in. Okay, Dana, what do you think? How would you explain what boundaries are, or what do boundaries mean to you personally?
Boundaries to me are kind of like that line drawn in the sand of this is who I am, this is what I stand for, these are my expectations of myself and of you. And also, like, I can't imagine having boundaries without making those clear to who I engage with, whether it's folks that I work with or even my family, my own personal people, family and friends. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really good point, because I think we're doing this like boundaries in the context of work and leadership, but also having boundaries with all different relationships is really important. And especially because students live, work, learn in the same place, those relationships will intersect. So I think that that's like, yeah, it's a good thing to consider, especially when figuring out what you need from other people and what you need for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. Why is it important to even have boundaries?
For me, I think it's important. Again, I think of like my expectations or my rules of engagement with other people, and how I want people to engage with me, but also how do I want to engage with folks. And I think being very clear about how I don't communication, how I want to be communicated with, when do I want to be communicated with, when do I not want to when do I not want people to communicate with me. It's almost liberating to be able to set those boundaries and have people respect them. You respect them as well. I think that we could be our own worst enemies, and when we set boundaries but we don't stick to them, I think it allows people to say, well, that feels a little iffy. So I know that they said that they only want to be contacted via email for work related things, but here they are texting me. And so I guess I can text them back at 11 o'clock at night and expect a response. I think it allows people to, I think, take advantage of your boundaries because you've opened that door for that. So I think that it's really important to, when you set those boundaries, that you stick with them, because you're only disappointing yourself when you don't.
I love what you said about it being liberating, because I think sometimes I would imagine my 20-year-old self feeling like, I don't want to set boundaries because I don't want people to think that I'm not flexible or I'm not approachable or I'm not, insert whatever to be a
Mm-hmm.
good helper. But I think that you're right. Like, at least as an adult, um, there is something really liberating about saying like, no, this is me taking care of myself. and I can model that for you because I want you to take care of yourself too. And like, this boundary is not because I don't care, it's not because I don't want you to have access to me, but I also want to be my best self, or be able to be as fully present. And so it is liberating versus restricting to be able to assert like, no, this is who I am, this is what I need, and I'm doing this because this allows me to be my best self for you and for
Right. And I love what you said about it's not that I don't care. I think a
me.
lot of times, like, sometimes boundaries come in the form of an email, a text message, but also it comes in the form of problems, right? Like people saying, I have this thing and I need you to help me with it. And instead of you saying, I can't do it for you, but I can absolutely help you work through that problem. Because if I'm solving the problem for you, I'm enabling you. And if I'm enabling you, you will never be able to solve your problems for yourself at a time when I'm not around. So I also can't take your problems. Your problems are your problems. You're not going to leave your problems on my desk, in my chair, in my office, or in my home. And so I think you can't solve other people's problems for them, because in the long run you're not helping them and you're absolutely not helping yourself. And so setting that boundary of, let me help you, but not let me do it for you.
Right. I think that that's such an important distinction, what you just said, because I think often students in helping positions feel like the best way to help or the easiest way to help is just to do for,
Mm-hmm.
not to teach or empower.
Mm-hmm.
Because that means that you have to be a little bit more hands off. You don't get to give an answer. And it's kind of like practicing deep listening, where you're not listening to respond, you're just listening to hold space.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I like what you said about that a lot. What are some of your own boundaries?
Mm-hmm.
I I can go first with this one. I feel like um, pre-COVID, I was pretty direct about leaving work at work and going home not wanting to do work um, unless necessary, but like also not engaging with other people because I didn't want this expectation that I could be available to do work 24 hours a day. And there's like lots of different mechanisms that offices and departments use to communicate with each other. You had mentioned email. We have Slack as a tool. And so we have all of these different channels in our department. Some are work related and some are fun related.
Mm-hmm.
So really had to have a conversation or like a heart to heart with my colleagues who, one, I want to like me, and two, I want to respect me, to be able to say like, on the weekend, love if you want to Slack me about what pie you made, or like this awesome river to check out, or this place to hike, or this really funny movie. Not so down with can you do XYZ for work or whatever. And that's been challenging sometimes, but I feel like that really helped me maintain work is work and home is home, or fun is fun, and that I can have friendships and relationships with people outside of work that I work with, but that we separate those. And like, I know sometimes because you and I are friends outside of work, like when we go out with our friends who we also happen to work with for dinner, sometimes we'll be like, okay, we'll talk about work for 15 minutes and then it's just like just us time, you know? So yeah, those have been some important boundaries. Also, I've been really clear with students that I don't give out my cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
My cell phone feels so personal to me that feels like you can then access me at any time of the day. And that doesn't always feel great. And I also want to model to students, like, you don't need to do that for yourself. But what about you?
Yeah, I think absolutely the cell phone. I think also I think have like being in a generation where I remember not having a cell phone, and now but I also like have kind of grown up with the idea of cell phones and access as an adult, like not growing up, like, as an adult. It was introduced into my life. I think that like I remember the days of not folks not having access to me all the time. And I love that. And I strongly believe that no one needs to have access to me all the time unless you have my children or you are my child. Um, but other than that, you don't need that. Um, and also, it's important to have time off. Maybe I shouldn't say this and this, but I am. I work to live. I don't live to work. And so my work is separate from my life. And when I am off work, I don't necessarily want to, I'm not going to do work. I don't want to do work when I am not working. And part of that is people contacting me about anything when I'm off. So I need that for my own health, my own mental health. And when I then go to work, I can be present, I can be alert, I can be there, and I can't be there if I'm always there. And I don't know, boundaries. I mean, there absolutely have been times where I've given people my cell phone, and I think that like it's been situational, like maybe there's something happening and I'm expecting you to follow up with me about that. And as I'm handing it over, like there's this thing, and in the future, as you have my phone now, my number now, if you need to text me about anything, it needs to be a picture of me, like something funny. It cannot be work related. Anything work related needs to go to my smith.edu account.
I feel like also what you're saying too is that like boundaries can be flexible.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean that they're not still like you're not still decisive or set about what your boundaries are, but that like sometimes you can, depending on what the situation is, morph a little bit and say like, so for example, I think like the post, like we're not post COVID, but in the time of COVID right now, my work schedule has changed because I'm living and working in the same exact place. And the boundaries that I would have around Slack communication at work pre-COVID when I'm leaving my office and going to my physical house is different because I might be more productive at night at home than I am in the office because I'm in the office during the morning. And so I've been able to have conversations with my colleagues and say like, yes, this is still a boundary for me. And also we're in a different type of circumstance right now where I might be more productive at an hour that's not typical. That doesn't mean that I expect you to change anything about that. That means that I'm trying to be more flexible about my work stuff. So I think like when you're like, if you have my cell phone and you want to send me something cute and funny, it says you have access to me, but in this kind of context.
Absolutely.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what at this point, or maybe like how has it shifted over time, or what did or does it feel like to assert your boundaries?
I'm trying to recall a time where I may have not been so great at asserting my boundaries, but I can't recall that because I think who I am today is who I've been for a really long time. And I think my position working in residence life, there was a time when at another institution where I lived in. And so I lived in a residence hall. My apartment was right there. There was a lot of access to me. And even then, like I think I was more available, obviously, to the students that I lived near and with. But I was still very clear about my boundaries. And I did that with my door is open right now, but when my door is closed, you don't have access to me because my door has been open for hours today. So you don't get to have me all of the day. But I think it also feels very freeing when you're clear about what your boundaries are. There should be like, I feel like it makes the expectations very clear, what my expectations are of how I want you to engage with me and what your expectations are of me. So if I say that I'm going to be available from this time to this time, absolutely, you should be upset if you're unable to get me at that time. But I've also made that a very clear boundary. So outside of that time, if you need me, you should email me and we can figure out another time. But I think it feels clarifying and freeing to be clear about what your boundaries are. I'm tired of saying the word boundary, but it is what it is. These are boundaries.
Yeah, I think I feel like there's kind of a couple different things that happen for me. Like I can remember very clearly that over time, I've become more confident and comfortable with asserting boundaries, especially as I become older or more grounded as a professional. Living in with Res Life was really hard to do that. Like I remember some of my RAs sitting outside of my apartment saying like, I can hear you singing. And I'm like, that's great. I don't need to know that like, you can hear that. Or like, who is that person you were standing outside talking to in the parking lot? And I'm like, oh my God, but I think what's hard is that even though I've become more comfortable and confident with it, sometimes like this discomfort for me comes when other people don't have as clear boundaries or don't articulate their boundaries as much. And then, jokingly make fun of mine or bring up mine or something. And so that's like I know I'm being a stickler about not wanting to talk about work over the weekend, but also like I feel okay about that, and so trying not to take on other people's discomfort around boundaries or other people's lack of boundaries or whatever, because they've worked really hard to say, like, I value myself enough to be able to create boundaries so that I can show up in the ways that I want to, so that I don't resent work or I don't resent relationships. It's like, it's also like showing up for a friend when you're like, I can't do this anymore, or I need to set a boundary with you because I'm mentally or emotionally tapped out. And sometimes that doesn't feel good because you want to be available or loving for that person. But I really do think and I think you had mentioned this earlier too, it's good for both you and other folks to know what your boundaries are, because I think it's a matter of respect and also honoring that that person is like trying to take care of themselves and also trying to be who they want to be for others.
Right.
But even now, sometimes I struggle with it.
It can be hard. Yeah. But I think also when you do not, I'm thinking of like a situation when you're working in a space with other people who may do the same exact work that you do, when you might have a boundary about something, but they don't, like, maybe they don't care as much as you do. So, and then that messes up, I think, expectations are across the board, because now it becomes, there are things that Billy is willing to do that Dana's not willing to do. Right. Or I have more access to Billy than I have Dana, then all of a sudden now Dana's the one that's not doing what Dana needs to do, when in fact Dana is, Billy isn't. And so, so then there's, I think and then it gets really complicated when you're working with other people. And so now I'm messing with the relationship between me and my colleague.
Right.
right? And so having those conversations around boundaries, perhaps with the people that you are working with or collaborating with or what have you, so that now we know how to express what our boundaries and expectations are and how we engage with other people is also really important.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. So we talked a little bit about this already. Are there any other things that come to mind
I think
about
the
like,
number one thing that comes to mind is what I just mentioned around like how that might affect the folks that you work with who may have differing ideas or expectations around boundaries.
yep. And I am in full agreement that I think when you're able to talk about those right off the bat, it doesn't leave room for this like haziness. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh, okay, well, I can appreciate that you're somebody that doesn't doesn't necessarily need that,
Right.
but if there's somebody else in the group that does, let's just find a way of being able to hold all of the needs of the group here. And it's not necessary to email each other on the weekend, or it's not, you know, unless there are certain parts of your job functions that require things. Um but I think you're right, like being able to be really clear about those things up front help to get all the guesswork out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can, you know, say like, we had this conversation already, like I don't, you know. And
I don't know what the
some,
problem is.
but I've had those conversations before too of, you know, there was been really challenging to say like, you know, I'm sorry, I need to reassert that like this is actually really hard for me, and I feel like I'm put in the spot to have to say again, I don't do X, Y, and Z, and it's not because I don't want to be available, or it's not because I don't care, or I don't want to be the best employee, team member, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But also I want to have my life outside of work, and
Right.
to be able to do that I need to disconnect,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want to feel bad about that, right? So yeah.
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 Yeah. I feel like it could solve a lot of problems later on down the road when crafting a social contract at the beginning before we even took that split. Let's do that early on to avoid things later on.
And I'd say too that like I think even in our friend circle we do some of that with each other too, because we care about and love each other, and so as people I think there's even been instances where we've like said, okay, I know you're being really flexible, but I also know this about you, and I know that you need X, Y, and Z. So like, let's check in, you know? And that I feel like carries over into different parts of our life too. Like you had talked about, your boundaries are different when it comes into the context of your kids.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes sense that like some of your boundaries will be different around different relationships. But I think the point is that people don't just establish boundaries for work, they establish boundaries in all aspects of their lives.
Absolutely.
So I think we've done a pretty decent job of giving some maybe indirect advice. um, I worked with you in Res Life for quite a bit of time, but I'm not there right now. So you working with students that live and work in the same place, do you have specific advice around how to navigate and set boundaries?
I would say be clear early on. And so a semester is starting, you're having your first house meeting or what have you. Be very clear about how to get in contact with me, when to get in contact with me. And if there's an emergency, this is who you call. This is not, it's, you know, like if you need immediate response because someone might be hurt or like there's something big and important and emergent is happening, this is who you contact. That is not me. But if you need some, like, I think just being really clear about when to contact you, how to contact you, and for what they might contact you for, I think is really, really, really important and can weed out a lot of things. Posting that, if you need to post it, if you need to send out a reminder later on, that is also okay. And I really discourage people from sharing their cell phone numbers. And I know that can get hard because you might be living in a house with folks that are your friend, or in a friend group or something like that. And living and working in the same space can be extremely hard to kind of differentiate between, how much access should I allow someone to have to me, with me. And I get it, because I was an RA when I was in college. I've worked in residence life for a long time. So I absolutely get the feeling that I need to have people be able to get in contact with me. I think just being clear about what you need.
Yeah. And I think you were saying too, like setting those from the very beginning. It's easier to let up on boundaries than to try and establish your ones later on. And that I've definitely learned the hard way, because I think, often helper positions attract people that are people pleasers with the best intentions.
Yeah.
But sometimes that translates to, oh, okay, well, I'll just be available. And then by the time you realize that that's not working, you're totally burnt out, but people have this expectation of how to get in touch with you or what access looks like or whatever. And it's also funny, like I'm going all these different places in my mind. When you talk about emergent, I remember living in as an RD and having somebody knock on my door in the middle of the night. And I said, "Isn't it an emergency?" And they're like, "Yes." So I opened the door and they were like, "I'm locked out." I'm like, "That's not an emergency."
No.
Like, being really clear about, here are the things to contact me for. Here are the things that you are responsible for. Here are the things that you can do on your own. Here's like how to be problem solvers. And I think, when I think about advice for student leaders that don't live and work in the same place, it's not necessarily different. Like set your boundaries around how you want to work with people in teams. Yeah. I work with a bunch of cohorts, and it's like, think about how you want to hold each other accountable. Or if you don't want to use your cell phone as a means of contacting each other about project updates, say that to one another. But also, if you're going to only communicate through email, you need to check your email, right? So,
yeah.
Also follow through on what those things are and making sure that you're checking back with your team of like, do we need to talk about this again? What are our expectations? How are we meeting them for each other? How are we not? But it's just as important for people that are working on projects or events or things like that together to be able to talk about their boundaries so that they can be successful in their execution of whatever. That's one of those like, whoops. Successful.
There's a lot of S's and C's and stuff. But also be consistent. Because, right. And thinking specifically for folks who are student staff in houses, and HPs, and like, how are you being consistent with the folks who live in your house? And so if you are only available for certain people, what message does that send? And so, yeah, I think just really being thoughtful and consistent about your interactions and the boundaries that you set. Like, you can't have like these really stringent boundaries for only some people, but I'm always available for these other people. And again, I know that sometimes we're living with friends, but also being really clear with your friends, like I have a job to do, I have a role in this space, and this is what it may mean, or this is what it might look like, and I need you to respect that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're at the end. Any last things? Any other pearls of wisdom or things you've read or things that you want to pass on? If not, that's okay too.
I think really think about, like, as you're watching this and when this is over, like really taking a moment to maybe jot down 5 things that feel like hard no's for me. These are unacceptable when I'm engaging with other people or when they're engaging with me. Um, and how do I want to be contacted in the role that I'm in, when, like, the who, what, when, where, how, like all of it. Really, really, really thinking about it before the semester starts and before you're already in a situation. I think that it's really important to really know who you are as a boundary setter.
And I think I'm going to absolutely second and echo that too. I think, we're heading into kind of a complex, different scenario. Like you may use this module when everybody is on campus, but particularly when we're trying to navigate so much stuff that's virtual right now. We're talking a lot about the context of setting boundaries when you're on campus, but many of you will be at home trying to navigate this too. So taking some time to reflect on what do your boundaries look like in all facets of your life. How do you do that with your family when you're attending Smith virtually and you're living at home? Or how do you maintain being accessible virtually with your organization and yet also having to manage school and all these other things and then being on Zoom 8 hours a day, So I think what Dana's suggesting is really important, that you take some time and reflect on what are your hard no's, who are the people that feel like you can really trust to respect your boundaries, what are some challenges that you faced in the past, what are some things you've learned about yourself that maybe you haven't communicated or haven't actually thought about yet. But it's a really, I think, important activity that you're suggesting, Dana, to be able to get right with yourself and be honest about, like, this is what I need and this is who I need to communicate it with, and these are the things that I feel really strongly about, these are the things that I feel a little bit more flexible about, these are the things that I feel totally adaptable around. But to be really clear with that yourself before you communicate that to anyone.
Right. I think the folks that have had the hardest time in these kind of leadership positions are the folks who have not been able to establish clear boundaries. So you get really burned out really fast because you also feel like you're doing all of the work all of the time. And the reality is none of these positions should be all consuming in that kind of way. And if they are, maybe it's time to take a step back and reflect about what it is. Why is that? What is it in this position that is such a sucker of my time and my emotional capacity and all of the things? And also, like, really thinking about, like, what is essential and what is not. So what are the things that I need to be doing in my position, and what are all of these other things that I've allowed myself to do that I don't need to be doing, and letting those go.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to conclude on. So I would let it go. So we hope that this has been helpful, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact either of us. And I'd also say that this takes practice. So I think Dana and I can communicate things in a way that feels like, oh, it's pretty easy to do that. And also we've had a lot of practice and are still practicing. So I hope that you don't watch this and feel intimidated that you need to be able to be great at asserting boundaries right away. But with some support from your advisors and your teammates and your supervisors, etc., know that like we want you to be able to figure out how to do it best for yourself, and that it's okay if you make mistakes or fumble or learn from that. That's all part of it. But we hope you got something good out of this, and we're excited for you to engage in your new positions. And thanks.
Thank you.